Alles gut.
Okay, ihr dürft gleich sitzen bleiben.
All right, you can remain seated now
Es wird jetzt gleich die eigentliche Konferenz beginnen, der
because
inhaltliche.
the actual conference is going
Wie
to
immer machen wir
begin
den
very
Auftakt.
soon,
Ich
content-wise.
stelle
Of course, we're
neuerdings die Check-MK
starting
vor.
with CheckMK News.
Da werdet ihr jetzt auch einen ganzen Haufen Teammitglieder
And
kennenlernen.
you are going to meet
Wir haben uns die Vorträge
a
aufgeteilt,
bunch of
dass
team
es nicht zu
members.
langweilig wird für
We
euch,
split
wenn
it
ihr
up for
gleiche
you,
Stimmen
so you don't have to listen to one person all the time, and you can see a few different faces on
Das
stage.
Konzept hatte ich schon angedeutet,
The
ist ein bisschen anders
concept,
als beim
as I said,
letzten Mal.
is a
Wir werden
bit
jetzt
different than
nicht
last time. We're not going
ein
to
Werk nach dem anderen
look
durchrattern,
at
sondern wir haben
one
wirklich
works and then the
die
next one,
rausgepickt,
but we
wo wir
picked the
sagen,
ones that
die
we
sind ein bisschen
think
erklärungsbedürftig,
they need a bit of
die sind
explanation.
interessant, da gibt es eine Story drumherum.
They sometimes they're
Die
interesting, or there's a
Features, wo man
story
einfach
around it.
überliest, okay, das haben wir
I
jetzt
mean,
auch
those
abgehakt, hier
features
haben wir jetzt
that
hier ein
you can
bisschen
read up on and
da
say,
gibt's
oh
ja
yeah, okay, now I've seen it.
Informationsquellen auf unserer Webseite, daraus
We
sind
have
diese
information resources for
Werklisten,
that on the
diese
website. We have the
Mailinglisten,
works list, the mailing list,
wo man sich
so you can
eigentlich
use
dazu informieren
that to get information about those.
kann. Genau, jetzt bräuchte ich noch den Andreas, um mich zu
But now I would
unterstützen.
need Andreas on stage here to support me.
Drückt ihm noch mal so ein Saalmikrofon in die Hand,
Could somebody hand him a microphone
zur Sicherheit.
just to be safe?
Ja, wir haben uns befasst mit dem Thema
Yeah,
Service Level
we
Agreements.
were looking at service level
Ähm,
agreements.
Was CheckMK schon länger kann, ist
I mean, what
eine
CheckMK
hohe
has had for quite a while
Verfügbarkeit.
is
Zum Beispiel, wie viel
availability.
Prozent der Zeit war ein bestimmter
So,
Service
how
in einem
many
bestimmten
percentage
Zeitraum
or how
available.
many percent of the time was a
Das
service
ist ja
available
schon
or not?
relativ ausgefeilt
So
in
that
der Art,
is
wie es das
quite
berechnet.
sophisticated in its way
Aber
of
es ist
calculating
noch
it,
keine SLA-Auswertung, weil
but
ein
it's not an
SLA ist ja ein
SLA
Agreement,
evaluation,
mit
because
einer
an SLA is an
Vereinbarung.
agreement
Das
with
ist schon egal. SLA bedeutet ja, ich habe
SLA
mit jemandem
means
anders eine Vereinbarung
I
darüber,
have an
wie
agreement
soll
with
denn meine
somebody
Verfügbarkeit sein,
about how
wie
good
auch immer
has
das
my
genau
availability
definiert
to
ist.
be,
Das heißt,
and
was
whatever
wir jetzt
the definition
entwickelt
is.
haben,
So
ist
what we
ein
have developed
Tool,
now is a
mit
tool
dem kann ich im CheckMK formalisieren,
with which
wie
I
hoch
can
eine
formalize within
Verfügbarkeit
CheckMK how
abgemacht war
high
für bestimmte
a
Services.
availability had to
Und
be
das kann ich
for
dann
a
eben
certain
anhand der
service.
tatsächlichen Availability
And then
ausrechnen, ob ich das eingehalten habe oder nicht.
looking at the actual availability, I can now calculate whether I
Dritter
met
Schritt,
this
da
goal or
sind wir
not.
noch so ein bisschen am
The
Anfang,
third
ist dann,
step, where we are still
dass
in
ich
early stages,
aktiv
is
überwachen kann,
that I can
ob ich Gefahr
actively
laufe, dass diese Agreements
monitor
verrissen werden.
whether I'm
Beispiel,
in danger of actually
ihr habt
breaking
pro
my
Monat
agreement.
30 Minuten
For example,
Downtime,
there's a downtime of
sind
30
aber
minutes per
schon
month, but
28
now we're at
verbraucht und der
already
Monat ist aber noch
at
sehr jung bis jetzt.
28 minutes
Können wir sagen,
and the
okay,
month
jetzt
is
muss ich
still
aufpassen, dass ich
young.
das nicht
So
vergesse.
we can now say,
Das
okay,
kann auch ein
I have to
Monitoring
be careful
leisten,
of
dass er
that so I
einen
don't break the
Betrieb vorher
agreement.
warnt.
So we can set up an alert
Und dann kann man zum Beispiel sagen,
beforehand.
eine geplante Downtime wird dann verschoben.
For example, then I could reschedule a scheduled
sozusagen
downtime
aufzupassen, dass nichts passiert.
to make sure that I don't break the agreement.
So, jetzt haben wir gesagt, ein SLA, wie ist denn das eigentlich
So
aufgebaut? Was heißt denn das?
let's look at SLA in detail. I mean, what does it even mean? A percentage of availability is just one factor, but there are so many cases that can happen. It may be a standard case,
Was wir machen müssen, ist
but
natürlich
what
auch
we have to do
Erfahrung sammeln mit
is,
euch gemeinsam.
well,
Wir schauen eure SLAs
gather
aus, wie sind die genau
experience with
definiert,
you, look
damit
at
man
what
die
your
im
SLAs
CheckMK
look
präzise
like,
abbilden kann.
so they can be
Das
represented
Einfachste
properly in
ist erstmal
CheckMK.
sozusagen, dass ich schaue, wie viel
So the first
Prozent
thing would
war
be
ein bestimmter Zustand zum Beispiel akut
at
oder kritisch.
what was the percentage for a
Aber
certain
natürlich
status
kommt der Nächste und sagt, ja, Prozent
critical,
nützt
for
nichts, ich
example.
brauche die Anzahl der
But
Minuten.
then somebody will say, I don't need percentages, I
Monate sind zum
need
Beispiel
minutes.
unterschiedlich lang.
For example, month can be in different
Also
length.
ist es nicht das Gleiche, wenn ich sage 30
So
Minuten pro
I
Monat,
can't
das
just
ist ein
say
bestimmter
30 minutes
Prozentsatz.
per month and then
Februar ein
turn
bisschen
it
mehr
into
Prozent
percent,
als im
because in
März.
February the percentage will be different than in March.
Die Frage ist natürlich, was ist zum Beispiel
So
mit
the
dem
question is,
One-Zustand?
what
Ist
about
das jetzt
the
okay oder nicht?
one,
Da muss man sagen,
one
das Problem
status?
ist
Is
eigentlich
this okay or
in der
not?
Availability gelöst,
And that
weil da kann
is
ich nämlich
actually part
genau
of availability, because
konfigurieren,
there I
wie
can
ich welchen
configure
Zustand bewerte.
clearly what
Also darauf
state
bauen wir natürlich auf.
has what rating, and
Also,
that is something we can
das
build
wäre
on.
jetzt mal ein Typ von Requirement,
So
den
this
man
is one
einstellen
type of
könnte. Ich
requirement
habe
that we
einen
could set up. I have a
oder vielleicht einen absoluten
percentage or
Anteil
maybe
von
an
okay oder vielleicht
absolute number of okay or negative.
Was anderes ist die Anzahl der Outages.
Something else is
Da
the
kommt
number of
jemand, der
outages.
sagt,
I
für den
have
spielt
customers
eigentlich
who
das
said
obere keine große Rolle,
that
sondern
the
es zählt
upper
nur, wie
part
viele
is not
Ausfälle
important.
gab's und
It
wie
just
lang waren diese
matters
Ausfälle.
how many outages were
Also
there
zum
and
Beispiel
how long were
Ausfälle
they.
kleiner als 90 Sekunden
Something less than
sind
90
nicht relevant,
seconds
weil
are
die
not
entsprechenden
relevant,
Client-Systeme sich darauf
because the
einstellen können.
client systems are then
Dann
adapted
dürft
to
ihr
that.
von mir aus 10 Ausfälle
So
haben, kürzer als 5
saying
Minuten
we
und
have
maximal
10
eine Ausfall
outages
länger als
less than 5
was
minutes,
weiß
and
ich,
maybe
4
one
Minuten.
outage
Das ist auch ein Beispiel,
less than 4 hours or something.
das es geben kann.
This is one example.
Mit dem
And we started with these two modules, but from the start we built it that way so it can be expanded through plugins, so that we are ready for your requests. Because one customer said, for example, that we also need to know how long does it take to acknowledge a problem in monitoring. So some sort of response time, and there would be a parameter that is not yet implemented in this first version, but through the plugin principle we can take CheckMK and expand it through MKPs, for example. Of course, we're going to try to insert everything in the rollout that you really need on a daily basis. But the plugin interface makes it easier for us to also create portings. For example, an SLA plugin can also be ported back onto a version, so I don't need to make an update. Of course, connecting them with time periods is important, because usually SLAs are based on a certain time frame. For example, our servers only meant to be active between 8 and 5. But maybe there's a different requirement between 5 and 8 that has more lenient rules. And with time periods, we can actually implement this by binding them to periods. And then these rules are only valid within the time period. So this is an example here for an SLA definition. Of course, you need a time period for the SLA. For example, let's say I'm looking at the monthly figures, whether I fulfilled my requirements, then this has to be set out in the SLA, because it does make a difference if I'm looking at 99.9% in a month or in a year. On average, that's the same, but of course, in a month, that makes a difference, because I cannot like shift capacities to another month. And then I can set further requirements underneath that, requirements for fulfilling the SLA. So what is the approach here? We of course always try to keep it as simple as possible. So the first step you have to perform is that you go into CheckMK, into this new module, and you can now create them in this module, the SLA definitions. You set the period and the requirements. And you can also set levels or thresholds. So that's the first step in monitoring, that you say, I have a warning threshold if 15 minutes of downtime are already used up out of 30. We are not sure yet how to optimally implement that. For example, with the question arose, what about crit? Should there be a crit level? But should crit be, I've already broken the agreement, or should it be, I'm close to breaking the agreement and we're not yet sure how to make that happen? So this is still quite an open space. But of course, I need to assign the SLA to a service to make it meaningful, because not every service has the same SLA, and not every service needs one. I think if you're looking at 100,000 services, probably only 100 have a definition like this. Right now, we are only looking at services, not at hosts or IE aggregates. But if you're taking the host and you have one service, for example, a P service, you can still do the same. And also a BI aggregate, I can request it through a check, and then I can also treat it like a service. That is the state of things in version 1.5. And that's about it. As soon as I've done that, I have the information about the SLA in my views. I can also export it as a PDF. And more experimental, I can also look at the SLA status through a check to turn this into SLA monitoring. So this is an example here. It is just a part of the image, but in order for it to remain readable, I zoomed in. So here I defined the time period. Which you cannot see here is the general period, like monthly, yearly. This is not in here. The weekdays mean I do have a monitoring period set, and within that, or Andreas, am I wrong here? No. Within that, the requirement, within that period, the requirement is valid. So with these things here, I can define several instances. For example, a maximum of 3 times critical with a duration of, is this min or max 1 hour?
Das wäre maximal 1 Stunde.
This year would be max 1 hour.
What
if I have one crit that's longer than 1 hour, then I already broke it?
Matthias, wir bauen ja alles rein, was du willst. Das geht.
Matthias, we can build everything you need.
Genau, aber ich denke mal, ich habe die Idee verstanden.
But I think you see where I'm going with this.
So, und jetzt, was man hier sieht, werden
So what we see here, you may recognize this as a normal checkmk rule. It's all rule-based as usual. So the well-known mechanism still works here, and I can create these definitions and assign them to services, as you already know. If there are several rules for one service, then of course rule number 1 applies. It's a typical principle, and right now one service can have one SLA. But within the SLA you can set several requirements. Whether we will ever need several SLAs for one service, I don't think so, but I'm sure some of you will need that and convince me that we do need it. But of course we want to keep it simple, and we want to solve problems that exist, basically, and that's why we chose to do it this way. What you see here is a standard service overview with one extra column on the right. Now the little issue with this is you have to configure the right column, because we would not implement this in every checkmk version because it doesn't make sense, because only very few of you are going to need it. So you go at Edit View and you insert this column, and the column does have set parameters. You could also look at different time frames, for example. Here, in this example, I can say I want to look at last month, but my SLA repeat duration is weekly. So here I can see the little icons, the little dots. These are 6 weeks I look at, and out of the 6, 1 broke the SLA. So, I mean, this is a chain of events here. So I can have a weekly SLA and look at it monthly. Of course, I can click the mouse on it and look at the details. Here in this view, I can see the same thing, but there are the service details. I can always put it in the service details because there are many details in there anyway. So as soon as there is an SLA specified, this new line appears. So if you have not adapted this view, then you will automatically see the SLA line now. So clicking on the red C for critical, I can look at details of this service, and I can see exactly what happened. I see, for example, that there was an availability, or there is an availability timeline and an SLA timeline. They are not identical. SLA is one step further, but I can see what state I had at what point in time. I mean, we've already seen that before. And down there you see there are gaps. Why are there gaps? Because the SLA is only set for a certain time period, for weekdays only, for example. So one could have called this working days to make it clear. That's why there are gaps. And in these gaps there is no SLA valid. So all the percentages are of course only counting the time that the SLA is active for. In the lower table, you don't see all the time periods, but only those that are relevant for the SLA. So I can see clearly what happened when. In the availability, there's always a comment function. but I think it's not yet implemented, but in version 1.5 we should have that. Is that right, Andreas? The comment function? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Yes, there is a comment function in the availability where I can create an annotation. Yes, the annotations will be in there.
The annotations
are important, for example, because I can reclassify with those. I can say my SLA treats downtimes differently when they are scheduled maintenance instead of unscheduled maintenance. So if I have that, then of course I need to have entered the planned maintenance, which you often forget. But I can then say later on, it was planned maintenance, and I can set it this way if I had forgotten in the first time. But don't laugh, but there is the other way around. A customer said it was scheduled as a downtime, but then they took it out. Simply because they said, I don't want a notification, let's turn it into a downtime. And this is the opposite version of this error. But you can use these annotations to turn this around, and you can also put a little note on it and make it transparent why you did it, for example. Then there's availability options. Those of you who have used availability know this. We have now split that up. Now there are options that are relevant for views and the other one for calculations. And the SLA, of course, needs the calculation options. For example, status grouping. For example, I can now treat a warning as critical. This is then part of the SLA definition. Then this is a bit experimental. For example, I can put in a warning level. For example, if 4 out of 5 incidents have already happened within the SLA, then it can be attributed a warning state, and then I could, in theory, put a check to it, so I get an alarm that I am now in danger of breaking my SLA. We do have a few minutes for questions, otherwise this would be it for this topic. Maybe you need to spread out the room microphones, because it is important that the questions are spoken into the microphone so everybody can hear it, and they're being recorded as well. Hello, Matthias. Good thing. I like it. And there must be a but. But I can implement it into the reports, right? At the present implementation status, there is a few things missing, but of course, it is important that this will go into reporting. It's one of the most common use cases. In 1.5? Yeah, we intend to do that. Then, looking at slide number 6, I hope there are no pie charts in there. Are there pie charts? As long as I'm talking here, there are no pie charts. No, that's just an icons from the icon set to make it look more colorful. But this is not a CheckMK screenshot. Pie charts are not really helpful because there's always one tiny red line that doesn't say anything. And you talked about hosts for the services. That's great, but with the hosts, I must say, this is just really difficult to work with. If we have to create a service or a VI for that, well, it's our design principle that we are only looking at services. And of course, if we see that hosts are just as important, we would have to add that. But for every host, there is a CheckMK service already. That does not look at the host's downtime 100%, but it would be a very simple way of getting close to what you need. Or you add a ping and use that instead. You would have to see. The architecture, of course, could do it, but one would have to do a first step now and see how that works. But it's quite trivial to create a new rule set where you can assign SLAs to hosts. Because, well, I think the need is there.
Okay, danke.
All right, thank you. Matthias, you mentioned that downtimes could be added or deleted afterwards. Is there a authentication or a rule set so that not every user can do that? Well, this feature has been around for a few years, and I do assume that there is authentication for that. I think so. Can somebody confirm this for me? If not, then we can enter that. But it should be there already. And it's not like you can change downtimes later on, but it's a certain level later. There is an annotation that's transparent, and there is an author who wrote that, and it can overlay the downtime. But the original downtime is still present. It's affecting availability and therefore the SLA, but it's transparently declared, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, setting a downtime or forgetting it's a daily business, but this shouldn't ruin my evaluation and then to put it into an Excel sheet and do it manually. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense. How is this data saved? It's not. They are already saved over the log files. No, the data source is availability, and that comes from the log files that are in a very efficient cache from microcore, and they've been kept in memory. And the SLA results from that. So if you change the SLA, you can also do recalculations, and you will get different results. So a long-term, if I need long-term evaluation of SLA, I should never delete log files. Well, it's common sense to keep log files for a few years. It shouldn't be an issue. If your log files are 10 gigs, then you have quite a few new things on your monitoring. But it's the case, yes. If further questions should arise, we are here in the break. Otherwise, I would like to open the stage for our next speaker, Simon, who is going to tell us about...
Hallo?
Hello?
Also, auch nochmal von mir ein herzlich willkommen.
Okay, welcome. I'm just going to go back to the beginning. So I would like to tell you everything that's new when it comes to management board monitoring. My first picture shows you a storage server. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, this server has their own interface, its own IP address, and it can use IPNI. And a management card or interface is mainly useful to actually have an independent server, so on-off configurations, and so on. Okay, so what does it look like when it comes to CheckMK? Well, I'm going to have to go back to explain that. So historically, you can say it's just one data source is one CheckMK host. And the only exception was AGEM plus SNMP. But overall, per data source, regardless of its data sources for one host, physical host or not, in CheckMK it was always one host. Another exception was the ISX special agent. In that case, you could choose if you wanted to have an additional agent. And that's what it looks like with the management board. Specifically, the management board having its own IP address, so this data source is also an independent host in CheckMK. Okay, now you just have to see how you show what belongs together, because I have a range of hosts right now that sort of belong together, but you have to think of a scheme or something like that. So I thought of a name scheme. You can also do it in different ways, for example, groups or tags or whatever. And if I'm disciplined, I just decided to go with a suffix, MGMT, so in this case it still works well, but the longer my list is, and also if there are also other things that are included, it could be, yeah, rather difficult, I would say. And yeah, it's just not easy to see anymore. And yeah, generally it's just not very clear anymore. If you just have a range of different hosts that sort of belong together, but you don't know which ones belong together and so on. Secondly, it's also a lot more complicated because you always have to think of at least two hosts. So if there are operations like searching for a host or deleting hosts or downtimes for maintenance, for example, it's just always at least two of them that you have to think of. And of course, in a way, it's also not very intuitive. It's counterintuitive because you have the host as a physical device that's somewhere in my environment, and you sort of rip that apart artificially just to bring it together within a checkmk. So one step that we've taken is, first of all, that one host or a host now can have different data sources that can be added to that host. So agent plus SNMP was already possible before, but now in host settings, you can also include all different special agents, for example. So you can just configure those, or yeah, you can just add them to the host. And also the management board, because the management board is a little bit different due to the fact that it has its own IP address. And what you see here, this is just the host settings. So it's a separate block right here, the top block. It's the data sources. You can SNMP, and also you can choose the agent. And there's a drop-down menu, different options where you can only have the agent, or also all different data sources that are applicable to this host. And then a separate block is the management board, as you can see, also with an IP address, protocol, credentials. And currently, we are supporting two protocols, that's SNMP and IPMI. And internally, we've structured it in a way that it is separated, so there are additional things that can be implemented easily. And I think that probably means where your costs are going to go down, development. My last slide now shows you the services. So that's what's unique about the management board. Management boards have their own services. Specifically, if you have SNMP and management board, there would be the same service twice. And the first visible difference is that these services have a prefix, so management interface, and then uptime, for example. And overall, they're similar because internally we have a shared code for the check plugin that we're going to make available. So really everything that comes with it. Okay. Now this is the end. Do you have any questions? Yeah, I have the following situation. We have a couple thousand hosts and also a couple thousand management boards that are monitored separately right now. And if I just imagine that we have to have the IP address from each management board and we have to insert that, that would be a task that would take forever. That wouldn't even work. And for that reason, I'm wondering what could be done about that. in order to make that easier. So we have a name scheme that are very, very, very structured. You could also use text, but the question is, how do you get them together? Have you thought about that? I have not. I'm not sure, Lars, have you thought about that? Is there a migration step? Okay, hi. Hi, Götz. Okay, so what you can do depending on the environment is that if you have a IP scheme, you can just use that. Or the way we are doing it currently is that you have the attributes for hosts. So in addition to the IP address of the host, you also monitor the management board IP address. And if you have a system that could be done with updates or something like that, for example, scripts, and that could be a possibility. Other than that, it's the same problem that we've had in the past as well. You do need to provide this information to CheckMK so it can be monitored. And at this point, there's no improvement right now. It's just a representation of the management board within CheckMK that we improved. And we have this connection between those two now. That's what has changed. Okay, how about if you have a Blade Center? Because then you only have one management IP for several hosts. How do you do that? Well, overall, it's up to you if you want to configure a management board or not. And you might have one host where you configure exactly that management board. If you don't want to use this feature, you can also have the management board as an individual host. That works as well. Well, I'm just interested in how to do it, because I then in the Blade Center have different hosts, but I can only have the shared management IP. Well, the question is what the management board means in this Blade Center. Is it just monitoring it, or? No. There's more information, different statuses and things like that. Well, I think we're just going to have to talk about that one-to-one. Maybe you can give me more details. Maybe you can just approach me during the break and we can talk about it. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, now my second part, that's dynamic data in hardware, software, inventory system. I'm sure you know the hardware-software system, the inventory system. That's just an inventory of a host with the help of a plug-in, and it just collects static data, something like BIOS information or installed software packages, specifically when it comes to switches. You just get an overview of the interfaces. And overall, that's just data that's static, or we call them static, that don't change a whole bunch. And this data is then sort of part of a tree structure. We have three big categories: hardware, networking, and software. And overall, this inventory is supposed to mirror the host a little bit, especially when it comes to hardware. And this tree is then accessible via the web interface of each host, and you can just expand it, navigate through it, depending on what you're interested in. There are different tables as well. You can also just see them in a different view separately. You can access them and also search more or filter. And I just mentioned that it's static data. So what happens to dynamic data? Data that derive from monitoring. Well, I have an example right here of a table space server, so it has the service details. It's quite a lot of information. That's already evaluated information, but overall they are restructured. So they're not part of a data structure like a tree or something like that, but instead it's just text. And that's how you see it. And the second point is it's not structured, and also it's also not part of the inventory system. The reason for that is that every time the plugin delivers new data, it then is compared with the previous data, and if there are changes, then there's just, it's just calculated. So if there's live data, you can assume that there are changes every time. So every time there's going to be a folder, and then it's just going to be full at one point, right? So the monitoring data that you're not interested in is also there, because you might not be interested because you just want the current situation. So why might you want them anyways? Why might you want that information? Why might you want that monitoring and inventory is at the same place? Well, one of the big reasons is that you really have all of the information. So for example, on a table space, the inventory data, SID, name, type, version, things like that. And if I now want more information from this table space, I just go to my status world, I look for my service, my host, that takes about 5 minutes, and I might have forgotten about everything else. So the motivation is that you just have the data in one place, you can just access everything in one place. And this full information about one thing is what I called it here, that can make it where I can make decisions easier, for example, if I might need this table space or not. Okay, so the motivation is clear. Our goal was to really make it where this unstructured data, this monitoring data, is now implemented in that tree. In addition to that, export of both data is supposed to be possible, and especially for developers. So for us, but also, I'm not sure if you also have inventory plugins, but of course it's supposed to be an easy way to get your data there. So what's our solution? Internally, we created 2 trees. So that's the inventory tree, which we already have, and then also the monitoring data tree. And for us, that made most sense. It made most sense because it's 2 different sets of data, types of data. So internally, we separated them first, and they have the following characteristics. So hardware, software defines the structure already. So we already have a structure, a tree structure, with all different categories and subcategories. And then we also have static data. It's tracking the history, and then also monitoring data tree. That monitoring data tree is using the same structure. So it's just a mirrored tree, really, and it just includes dynamic data. And in this case, we are not tracking any history. So what do these trees do together? Well, what we want is, because they sort of mirror each other, we can merge them, and at the end of the day, everything is great, as you can see. And we do that as late as possible, because there's this interim step or a point in time where the tree on the left, we have to track history, and at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a table. So first of all, via the interface, that's how it's going to be visible. So what you see here, that's the current sites, that's the dynamic data, and the list, of course, goes on. So first of all, it's on the web interface, and it can also be exported together. Okay, so that was everything I wanted to say about that. Are there any questions about that? So are you planning on using the history data as delta? Because right now, if you're changing it, the whole snapshot of the host is saved, and that can produce a lot of data that are just in your system. Well, as far as I know, we're not planning on doing that, but maybe we can do that. I don't know. I'm not sure. But we're assuming that this data is not changing a lot in the beginning. Because of that, there shouldn't be so much history that's being tracked. I think the question was asked a little bit differently, because the reason why we are using the secondary is because it's supposed to be able to change quickly, and there's no history, right? So that's the whole point of it. So all the data that's changing slowly once a week or something like that, that is part of the history. But we want very dynamic history, or very dynamic data. And we had exactly that problem, that the history is just blown up. And because of that, we have this concept that we exclude this dynamic part that's not part of the history. And therefore, it's not going to need any space. Okay, but even the current history, if there is anything that's changing, for example, software packages that are installed or version updates or something like that, which can happen quite frequently, right? Every single time this whole structure that's now existing is saved in a folder, right? And that is what really uses a lot of space, specifically if it's big installations with lots of hosts. It can be 20 gigabytes. While, of course, nothing has changed about that. You are right. In our case, we have a use case that networkers are always missing. It's the inventory view of the operational and the status of the switchboards. And they want to know if that can be used in a different way. So what is that going to be like? Do I have the switch port overview? Do I have part of the monitoring data there? Is that combined? Is that table combined? Well, in this inventory plugin, there's no dynamic part, but we can implement that very easily, so that you can see all different traffic and everything. That can be implemented. Well, that would be something that would be very, very helpful for us. Yeah, maybe during the break or something like that, you could just tell me what it is exactly you need, what you need in this table, and I can do that soon. Okay, thank you.
Hello. In English, I have a question regarding the inventory. I see that you say that the inventory is a static part of your tool. I don't agree with that, because inventory is also dynamic. If you look at a lot of customers, they add systems and they are removed, let's say, at hourly basis, daily basis. Certainly, if you're going to go into Docker and those things, everything is dynamic. So the inventory, what I see is if you say the inventory is static, it's not really true. Your inventory is also dynamic. And I'm missing here, for instance, new items that you add to the inventory and items that have been deleted in the meanwhile. So we have built this already for ourselves so that we have dynamic inventory. And also, in this case, you create, for instance, tables of table spaces. We've already built dynamic tables in the long output of the checks. Within there also performance and everything. So if you want to change a little bit of this information,
yes,
it would be
why
useful.
not? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay, ich glaube,
all right. I think there are quite a few questions, but Martin, we have to look at the time. We may have to move on to the next step, but we are here in the breaks. Please approach us. Yes, I thank you for listening, and I present the stage to the next person.
Ja, vielen Dank, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. Next one is Marcel, who is talking about a new, unexpected, nice feature in CheckMK that some of you, or will alleviate the pain for some of you. Right. Good morning, everybody. It's great that so many of you are here. And I want to show you in the next few minutes something. It is checking your configuration or analyzing your configuration. I mean, what are the reasons for looking at your configuration? Perhaps you have performance issues, or you have no performance issues, but you want to know how could I adapt my configuration further so that I don't get into performance issues later on. Perhaps it's about operational security, so you don't want to lose any data, or just general security reasons, you want to prevent others from being able to access your data. When we met at the last conference, we were thinking about this at the evening event, and then Simon had the idea we could help the user somehow. And a few months later, a new feature was born. And it's called Analyze Configuration. It's in the Vato configuration snap-in in the sidebar. The icon you can see here, I zoomed in on it. And if you click on that, then several tests are being performed automatically within the CheckMK environment. For example, for the area of performance, here you can see the tests that we do by default and the results for your environment. If you're working with distributed monitoring and your external sites are being configured from your master site, you get for every configured site a corresponding list with columns showing you the results of the tests. You have several options here. You can use the information icon to look at what's being tested. Why is my status the one that is being shown here? You can also deactivate tests, or if there is a not okay status, you can click at the final item and acknowledge this status. This works in all three areas. Here in reliability, we have the check for a backup configuration. In this case, I may have forgotten. And when it comes to security, we check whether if you have set up a backup, do you have it encrypted? Are you doing HTTP access or HTTPS? And if you have LDAP connections configured, then of course we also check there whether SSL is being activated. These are the tests that we have included so far in this implementation. Now the question is directed at you. What do you want CheckMK to analyze as well, so that you don't have to do it manually? Please write your ideas to our feedback address. We will collect them for future analysis, and we'll try and implement it for you. Thank you for all the fish.
Danke, Marcel.
Es geht weiter mit Manfred, der euch ein bisschen Neuigkeiten erzählen wird.
The next one is Manfred, who's going to tell you about Check and Pay appliance news.
So, hallo. Jetzt fällt das Mikro runter, super. Ein paar Appliance News, so quasi die Neuigkeiten.
Right, here are the appliance news for this year.
4 kleine Punkte.
4 little points.
Kurz was zu der
First of all,
Geschichte
about the Transtech generation, then we have
kurz was zu
a model overview, then something about firmware, and something about our distribution network in the US.
Ja, Rack 1, Mark
So
2,
Rack 1, Mark 2, Rack 4, Mark 1, that's our Transtech generation.
Da haben wir wohl auf den falschen Partner gesetzt.
We were really trying with the wrong partner here. After the first ones were delivered, we had a delivery problem, then rumors appeared, and on the 27th of July,
Das war's mit Transtech.
Transtech said that's it.
Wichtige Info für die Kunden, die
So
eine
for those customers who have one of these,
Support bleibt erhalten, alles
support
weiter wie
still
gehabt.
exists,
Läuft alles über unseren Partner
will
Comnet
continue through Comnet,
und wir mussten uns dann weiter
and we had to keep looking.
Das war quasi so die Geschichte zu Transtech.
So that was the
Jetzt kommen wir zur
Transtech
Modellübersicht.
history.
eine neue
Then
Rail
looking at the
2.
models, we have a new Rail 2.
Die ist relativ leistungsstärker
It's
ausgelegt
quite
als das letzte
performant,
Modell. Haben eine
more performant than the last one. It's an Intel Q7 with 4 gigabytes of memory and 16 gigabytes of industrial SD card.
Serviceanzahl bis zu 2000 ist damit kein Problem.
Service up to 2,000 services, no problem. It's industrial standard, can be used in industrial environments,
Und benötigt auch bloß so 15
and
Watt.
just needs about 15
Also
watts.
ist nicht
So
Stromhungrig.
it's not very power hungry.
Nachdem ja Transtech weg war,
Now
mussten
that
wir einen
Transtech
neuen
disappeared, we had to find a new supplier for our hardware.
für Huawei entschieden.
We looked into Huawei
Ein Unternehmen, das weltweit liefert.
because it's a global
Dazu später
company
gleich mehr, das war uns
or
nämlich
globally
besonders
active
wichtig.
company. That was important for us.
Hier haben wir jetzt die Rack 1 mittlerweile
Here we
für
have
Modellreihe
Rack
3.
1 and we're already at Mark 3. It's an Intel Xeon E5 with 6 cores, 16 gigs of RAM, and
1 Tera
a double 1 terabyte hard drive.
läuft im RAID 0. Service bis zu
It's in RAID 0 service
40.000,
up
glaube
to
ich, wenn ich nicht alles
40,000 or something,
verdreht habe.
if I didn't mix it up.
Die beiden sind
So
schon
these
lieferbar
two are available
und
already
bestellt werden.
and can be ordered
Dann kommen wir
through us.
quasi zur
And
Rack
then
4.
we're
Das
looking
ist
at
ein
Rack
2HE
4, that's a 2 HE
zwei
server,
Xeon Silver CPUs
2
mit
Xeon
12
Silver
Core
CPUs with
Cores
12
jeweils,
cores
64
each,
GB Arbeitsspeicher
46 gigabytes of
zwei
memory,
SSDs
and
erstmal.
2 SSD hard
Damit
drives,
sollen Services bis zu
and you can handle
400.000
up to
möglich sein.
400,000 services with this.
Ja.
Warum haben wir hier keine normalen Harddisks?
Why do we not have
die
normal
Leistung
hard
sonst gar nicht
disks?
ausnutzen kann. Also in unseren Tests haben wir
Because it
festgestellt,
would
mit normalen
be a
Festplatten
bottleneck for
kannst du nicht
performance.
annähernd
With
diese ganzen
normal hard
CPU-Cores
drives,
auslasten.
you can never really
Also
make all the
macht keinen
CPU
Sinn,
cores
überhaupt
work
diese
properly. So
Festplatten anzubieten.
we
Deswegen
never
nutzen wir
even
nur die
considered
SSDs.
conventional hard drives, so that we only have SSDs. In the lab, we managed 500,000 services, but then the SSDs were full. So this thing is powerful. Yeah, it will probably be available in Q3 this year.
Das schon wieder ab.
My microphone
Dann
is
kommen wir
dropping
zur
again.
Firmware.
Right, looking at the new firmware,
Wahrscheinlich auf der
some of
Website.
you have seen this on the
Gibt's
website
zum
already.
Download bereit.
It's available for
Basiert
download.
auf Debian 9.
It's based on Debian 9.
Sicherheitsupdate bis
It's
2022.
has security
Und
updates
ist
till
auch sofort
2022,
update-kompatibel mit
and
1.3er Version.
it's update compatible with down to 1.3.
Der Upgrade gestaltet sich relativ einfach, wie gehabt.
The
Firmware
upgrade
runterladen,
is quite simple.
nämlich
Upload the
per
firmware file.
Bootloader
One important thing to
nach
remember,
der
please,
Installation
after
noch
the
das
installation,
Check-and-Paket für
the Check-MK
die
package
Firmware-Version
for the
1.4
firmware
installiert
1.4
werden,
has to
sonst
be
fährt die
installed,
Site nicht hoch.
otherwise the site won't start.
Dann kommen wir zum Partner in den USA.
And looking at the distribution partner in the US, we now have a distribution partner there. It's called
Damit können
TruePath,
wir quasi denselben
and with that
Service
we can
anbieten
offer the
wie
same
in
service
Europa
as in
mit
Europe
Comnet.
with
Wir haben einen
Comnet.
lokalen
We have a
Ansprechpartner,
local partner,
wir haben Support in derselben
we have
Zeitzone
support in the
und wir
same
können
time
die
zone,
Appliances direkt aus
and
USA
we can also
verschicken,
ship our
sprich
appliances
keine
directly from the US,
Zollformalitäten
so no customs, no formalities.
Kleine
The small one, the rail, will probably not be available in the US. The Rack 1 is already available, and the new one will be probably available at the same time as we have it here. So Q3 this year. That's all I have to say. If there are any questions directed at me. I see you're looking for a break. Thank you, Manfred, for the news. But we have one colleague, Martin. Yes, Martin is going to show you a little bit about a new idea we had about how to get better feedback from you, and Martin is going to show you. And then we have a break. Yes. You all received the stickers yesterday, didn't you? If not, please approach me. I still have a few. Because in the future, we want to continue with you thinking about where can CheckMK go in the future. We thought there were 7 issues for which we would like to hear your opinion. Is this something that you think is important? Is it something that we should focus on? And I just picked one, took a picture, infrastructure monitoring, and then you can say, there's always the topic, here, infrastructure monitoring, and I can say, yes, I like it as a topic. If you want us to work with this, put a sticker on it. Then we have subtopics. Natural integration is one. We think it's really important, or you think it's really important. Then please put a sticker on it so we can prioritize and see, okay, this is the topic that we need to look more at in the future. So it's all split up into fields. So if you've seen, if you see there are some stickers, put yours with it if you think it's important. You can also add comments. We have post-its. For example, I like refrigerators to be monitored. Then please put that comment on the page. And if you see that somebody put a comment up there and you liked it, then you can like this comment using your sticker. If you're not sure what to do, please approach me outside. I can tell you about the system. And that would be it. From my side, I would let you have your little break now. Unless Matthias has something to say. No, it's the break. Wait. Every sticker that's not being used can be changed for a free beer later. I heard. Yes, sure, why not?